Lindsey Harrod is an interior designer whose classic Southern style and impeccable attention to detail has been featured in publications like House Beautiful, Flower Magazine, and Southern Living. Her work embodies the essence of grand millennial style. It's timeless, it is fresh, from incorporating treasured heirloom pieces to creating spaces that are warm and inviting and distinctly personal. She has really mastered the art of blending tradition with a contemporary twist. As a mom of three, Lindsey knows all too well how this time of the year gets busy with school, holidays, life in general. So we are diving into all things function, focusing on those workhorse spaces in the home and how to make design work for you, blending practicality with beauty. Pour yourself a cup of tea, cozy up, and let's jump into this delightful conversation. Welcome to Grandma's Silver, where tradition meets today. I'm Allie, your host and the founder of the Grand Millennial Lifestyle. Here, we blend aesthetics with nostalgia, engaging in conversations with lifestyle brands, designers, and more to rediscover the timeless charm of the past. Join me as we journey from home to heart, illuminating the past and polishing the present with the gleam of Grandma's Silver. Lindsey, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to chat with you. This is a fun time of the year, but I want to give you the opportunity to just tell people a little bit about who you are, what it is that you do, and how you got into this line of work.
Yeah. Well, first of all, hi. Thank you so much for having me. This is exciting. I love to chat design. Yeah. So I'm Lindsey Harrod. I own a design firm based in Houston, Texas called Lindsey Harrod Interiors. We're a full service residential interior design firm. And I have been in the interior design space since 2008. I have an undergraduate degree in architecture. I got a master's in interior design from New York. And then I spent 7 years working for a really amazing interior designer, Celery Kimball, out of New York. And then I launched my own firm in 2015. Been working out of Houston ever since then.
That's fun. So and I'm kind of launching right in here, so don't mind me. Architecture. How did you go from architecture? Like, did you know going into your architecture undergrad that you eventually wanted to segue into design, or did that happen? Was there something that happened in the middle there?
Great question. Well, growing up, I was always very artistic. I loved drawing. I loved art classes in high school. I was very crafty. I liked doing DIY and painting and projects with my mom. So it was always an interest of mine, but we didn't grow up with an interior designer. My mom had some friends that would help her do things from time to time, but it wasn't really a career path that I really aspired to or thought that it would be a good option. And so when we were looking at majors, my dad encouraged architecture because it's a little bit more prestigious and knew that there was a good career path on that. And it kind of married the creativity side. And I was also really good at math and it seemed like a good fit. And so that is what I pursued. And also the school I wanted to go to did not have an interiors program. So I kind of picked the school over the major and had a great experience. I really loved it. I thought I was going to do commercial interiors. That's kind of where I wanted to do. And I did some internships that were in that realm, and that was what I was going to pursue. But I had a mentor that said, an architect can always do interior design, and an interior designer cannot necessarily do architecture. So she encouraged me to keep going with architecture. And I actually was planning on getting a master's in architecture, applied to schools all up and down the East Coast because I really wanted to go to the East Coast. And when I went to tour some of the schools, I just didn't feel it. My heart wasn't in it. I didn't think I could do that for several more years. A lot of those programs were very futuristic and just didn't seem to fit me. And I was touring Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, and I turned to my dad and I just said, I don't think this is what I want to do. And he said, well, they have an interiors program. Why don't we go look at it? And we did. And I walked in and just asked for a tour, and they said, you got into the architecture school? And I said, yes. And they said, well, we'd be happy to have you too. So I switched my application over to the interiors department.
Wow,
And
literally on site.
yeah. And they were like,
Oh
we'd
my
love to
gosh.
have you.
Oh, that is amazing.
So I switched and I've just fell in love with it ever since. And even then I thought I was going to do commercial because that just seemed like what interested me. And a lot of the focus in even interior design schools is on commercial interiors. And I learned a ton, but I really was reading Domino magazines on the weekends and just devouring all things design at the time. And I had a lot of residential interior designers that I really looked up to. And so when it came time to get a summer internship, I applied to a bunch of big interior designers in New York. And Celery Campbell called me and I interned for her that summer. And I thought, okay, if I hate this, I can always go back if I don't like residential. Because I kind of thought that maybe the client side wouldn't be as enjoyable or
Mm.
trickier as opposed to having a little bit more freedom. But what I find is it's actually the opposite. And I fell in love with residential and I just kind of never looked back. So I finished my degree and then stayed on with her for 7 years and had the best experience and just fell in love with residential. So just kind of, so one thing segued into the next, I guess.
I was going to ask a little bit about your style and your design. If we talk about trends, right? This is Grandma Silver, which is kind of an offshoot of my brand, which is Grand Millennial Lifestyle. And even the word Grand Millennial, I think people roll their eyes. It is this resurgent,
Yeah.
modernized trend.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you do a really beautiful job. Like you are very like quintessentially, you have a not all of your projects, but I would argue many of your projects and the kind of your look has a lot of grand millennial elements to it. Feminine, but anchored.
Well, thank you. I think that I'm a sentimental old soul. I joke a lot that I'm a grandma, and now I've really got into mahjong, and my husband really thinks that I've turned into an old lady. But I think that it reminds me a lot of the way that names kind of have a resurgence in culture. A lot of my generation are naming their children after their grandmother's names, whereas our parents' generation you didn't see those names. It's kind of cyclical in the same way. We are all interested in not what our mothers did, but what our grandmothers did because we
Mhm.
have a sense of nostalgia. So I really think that's kind of how this grand millennial look came about. We're
I
looking
agree.
for grandmothers things that our mom didn't want, but now all of a sudden they seem very interesting and sentimental to us. Me personally, I have a ton of my grandmother's stuff and I can't get rid of it. It reminds me of her. I lost her a few years ago and every time I pick up something that she had, it reminds me of her and it makes me smile. And so I think that there's a sense of comfort and ease in some of those pieces, but we're still a fresh generation. We still want it done in a fresh way. So I think that's kind of where the grand millennial trend came through. And I wouldn't even say it's a trend because I think that it is a way of living and a way of designing that is very timeless.
Mhm.
And so that's how I approach it. I think that it is timeless design and I mix a lot of old and new. So I use a lot of pieces that my clients bring to us or we source that are vintage or antiques and mix with new pieces to make it fresh. Or we change the color scheme. You know, you can use an old piece and just mix it with a different, more modern color palette and it becomes a totally different thing. So that's a little bit the way that I think about design and the personal way that I design. Now, I have some clients that don't really love antiques, and so we don't use them. So it is a little bit more client dependent, but I'm finding a lot of them do want a lot of that mix in their interiors.
That's great. And it's funny you said that because that's actually where Grandma Silver, the name of the podcast, came from, was that I think that we are a generation that appreciates those things.
Yeah.
So, like we would want Grandma's silver and Grandma's stuff and to decorate, to
Mhm.
use it and to decorate with it. So I love that you mentioned that. But understanding that many of your clients kind of have that attitude, how do you approach working with them, understanding that they might have that sentimental connection to pieces or like having to weave those things into the design?
Whenever we start a project with a new client, we always ask them to give us their inventory. So we go through their house and we look at everything and we take dimensions of every piece. And I always tell people, okay, well, give me you can use if there's a place for it. And then I never want to see it again. So I usually have like 3 buckets that we work off of. Some people have one thing that they kind of like. Some people have quite a few antiques. I have several clients that had a ton of antiques and sentimental pieces that they had collected through their lifespan, as well as family heirlooms that were very important to them that had to find a home. So It just depends on the client. And then I also have newer, younger clients that haven't inherited anything that they really like or that they are bringing much to the table, but they want to incorporate pieces. So then in that case, we help them find pieces. So they may not have that sentimental piece to the puzzle, but they're pieces with a story and a history that you can see that really add character to a space.
You mentioned that you had originally wanted to study on the East Coast. You're from the South, right?
Yes, born and raised in Houston. Went to my undergrad at the at Texas A&M University, which is just a little north of Houston. But then I'd studied abroad in Italy, and I really wanted to get out of Texas for a while, and the Northeast just kind of called to me and seemed like the fun place to be, and especially for design and architecture. I really wanted to go there.
You ended up back in this, you're in the South again, right? Texas?
Yes, back in Houston, I got married, and my husband and I, he had an opportunity in Houston for his career that brought us back initially, and then just wanted to be closer to family. And we never really saw ourselves as lifelong East Coast people. I think Texas was really a big draw for us to come back home. So moved down here, kept working, and then eventually kind of grew my own portfolio enough that I could start my own firm and then start a family. So we moved back, and that was kind of high on the priority list too.
We'll talk about that in a minute. Because you've done some traveling, how has that impacted your own sources of inspiration or your design approach? Because you've obviously seen a varied range of styles.
Yes, I have. And I think every step of the way and every part of your life informs some aspect of your style and the way that you dress and the way that you hold yourself on how you design and what appeals to you. And that goes for everybody, not just designers. So my upbringing had a lot to do with it. My family had a lot to do with it. And then moving to New York and working under such an amazing interior designer, and the projects that we worked on and that ran through that firm were incredibly influential. You know, the company I worked for was based in Palm Beach, so there's a lot of Palm Beach influence that I learned. Worked on a huge project in Palm Beach, so that was really influential in my style. So a lot of that color and pattern and playfulness comes from there, but also a lot of business practices and attention to detail and how I run my jobs, and just sort of the nitty-gritty of the design business comes from that experience as well. So all those little things just kind of molded the way that I view things and what I'm attracted to and what I love.
So many people out there, because I get these comments all the time, and I would love to hear from your on my Instagram page. I'd love to hear your perspective here. How do you design for a family, a couple, without it feeling and have that feminine, romantic, beautiful feel to it without it being too feminine? I always see people commenting on some of my images that I share saying, "Oh my gosh, I love this, but my husband would never." But I
Yeah.
think they could, but I would love to hear a little bit about that process or those conversations, because I imagine you run into sometimes where guys are just like, absolutely not. Or they
Yeah.
think they can't, or they want to veto something, and then you talk to them and explain the overall vision.
Right. Well, each couple we work with is totally different. And so I think some of the more colorful projects that we've done, or the ones that were much more feminine, were also projects where the husband honestly didn't care. He didn't care, was very secure in himself, and was like, whatever you want, honey, is fine. I don't care. So some husbands don't even come to our design presentations. They really just let their wives do whatever they want. Conversely, we have some of the opposite. It just depends on the dynamic of the couple. Some people, the husbands care exponentially more than the wives do. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. We are just very in tune to what our clients want, and we tailor our design process and what we select and show them based on their wants and needs. So yeah, for those people that comment, there's no way my husband would ever, well, then that's not for you. And that's why there's a million different wallpapers in the world, and there's a million different ways to put a room together. It's all unique to the family. And I think that that is what is the most important part. And in our process, we try to get to know our families that we're working with and understand the dynamics and who cares about what, because typically you're not designing for a singular person. Pretty much all of our clients are families, and they have different wants and needs. They have different dynamics. They have pets, young kids, grandkids, empty nesters, everywhere in between. And so we have to think about that and tailor the space to them. We try to get in our client's head, understand where they want to put some color or not. Sometimes they may want to have a little bit more fun in a specific room and bring it back down in another space. It just depends on the client and the room. But even in a really girly room, even in a space that has a lot of florals, you just have to have balance. And that is the case in design from top to bottom, no matter what type of style you're after. So for a room to be successful, it just needs balance. So we have to look at that. So if you have a really floral pattern on the wallpaper, then I'm going to tone it down with the curtain fabric or the rug or the upholstery fabric. So we're just looking to balance a room out and anchor it in a way. If there's feminine aspects, we need some more masculine to balance it out. So there are ways in a space to give a little bit for him and a little bit for her and make it work for everybody.
That's great. And then the other thing people, and again, you do a really beautiful job of this. People tend to shy away from color. Now, I have to imagine that most people who are coming to you have seen your work, so they're probably not asking for a ton of grays and, like neutrals. How do you approach those conversations when people might feel a little anxiety about living in a bolder looking space? Color doesn't have to be scary.
No, it doesn't. And the conversations that I've had with people are usually around fear, right? But to your point, they often aren't calling me if they want a very gray box. That's not what I like. I think that that's sad and depressing,
Yeah.
but to each his own, right? Call somebody else. There are a million different designers and experts in the world. We do have clients that get a little bit anxious or get a little bit fearful. One thing that I always tell them is that I honestly have never had a client come back and say that we went too far or that we should have reined it back in. And I find in my experience that people get bored a lot faster with boring spaces than if they do with their colorful rooms. A lot of times clients will come back to me and said, okay, I had this happen recently. A client, we didn't do a lot of color or anything bold in some of her transition spaces and in her entryway. They were kind of simple and we just kind of did some white walls and kept it really clean. And her other spaces were much more developed and had a lot of pattern and color. And it makes her sad now. Like she said, she came back and was like, we need to do something with these other spaces because at first they were supposed to be a little bit more of a break from some of the more pattern and color, but now they just seem too cold and boring to her. You just gotta have to go for it. And I often tell people, if you're nervous about a design decision, then it's probably the right one because it is pushing you and it is a little bit out of your comfort zone. Those are usually the best decisions and the most successful ones.
That's a good philosophy. You mentioned a couple of times that you have a lot of clients who are couples, families, pets, children. I know that you're a mom. So I would love to talk a little bit about this time of the year in particular, when things ramp back up after the summer, kids are back in school, everyone's schedules feel exponentially just crazier. And the intersection of that with design. You can design a space to work for your schedule. I think sometimes people get a little too focused, especially if they're trying to do things on their own. They prioritize the aesthetic over the function, and then it ultimately doesn't work. But as a designer, function is a big part of your job. So I would love to hear a little bit about what some of those conversations look like when you are working with families or you have to take utility into consideration.
Right. Well, one of the principles of design is form and function, right? Form follows function. So function always has to come first. If it doesn't work, it is not a successful design. And there are probably a ton of beautiful rooms out there that you've admired and seen. But if it doesn't work for that family, then it is not a successful design. So we have to look at both. And this comes into play a lot in our new construction projects and renovation projects, because oftentimes we are developing and designing some of the more utilitarian spaces, or the spaces that really are big functioning parts of a family, like a mudroom or an entryway or a kitchen or a laundry room, the kind of hardworking, hard-wearing spaces. While we want them to be beautiful, they really do have to function, because, a well-run house is the most important part of the puzzle. So we have a lot of conversations early on, especially I've been working on cabinetry for a couple of new constructions lately, and there have been a lot of conversations with our clients about how they're going to use this space. How do they feed their animals? Where do they want to keep a kennel or dog food or a litter box, or how they like to handle their kids' sports equipment and shoes and backpacks. And a laundry room might be about what systems do they have for their laundry? Do they hang everything? Do they like baskets for everything? Do they iron a lot? Do they steam things a lot? So there's a lot of conversations that we have and questions that we ask to try to make sure we're meeting a lot of those needs. And there are things that we've sort of learned along the way that we find to be really helpful or successful for other families, that we'll try to, okay, you're not sure how you handle this. We've done this in the past and it's been really successful for this family. So we try to make suggestions. And then kind of picking the right finishes for a lot of those spaces too is incredibly important. Is it durable? Are the floors going to be durable? Is the paint finish durable? I was looking at some wallpapers for a mudroom the other day, and I had a really great idea for one, but I said, this is a mudroom and there's some outside corners that I have to work with, meaning, an outside corner of a wall that's going to get a lot of wear and tear, and backpacks are going to get thrown up against it. So I loved the wallpaper, but I said, okay, this is not going to work all the way down to the floor. Maybe we should put in a chair rail and wainscoting to get some protection to the bottom half, so that we do want to use the pretty wallpaper above. It makes sense. So there's a lot of things that we try to think through when we're working with clients to make sure that it does both things that we want.
I'd love to talk through some of these spaces based on your experiences, and as a parent, but also as someone who designs family spaces.
Yeah.
What the average person is probably not remembering or thinking about in their home. They would make their lives just operate and function so much better.
Well, which space do you want to talk about first?
Yeah, let's start mudroom, right? Mudroom, entry.
Okay. I just like to tell people to think through their routines. When you walk in the back door or walk in the side door or whatever it is, however you enter your home, or ideally your new home, how do you envision using that initial space? Do you not allow shoes in the house? Do you take them off at the back door? Are you a bag lady who is always carrying a purse and a water bottle and a tote and shopping bags? And are your kids doing a ton of sports? Do they have a lot of backpacks? Do they have dance bags and cleats? And just sort of, do your husband play tennis every day and sweat to high heavens? And as he walks in the back door, he needs to take that off and not take it back to the, I had a client that told me that. She's like, I need a laundry basket so that when my husband walks in the back door and he's dripping sweat, I do not want him traipsing all the way through the house, and I don't want his stinky workout gear stinking up my laundry basket in the master. So we it's like, how do you walk in? What do you have and where do you need to put it? We kind of talk through all that. So if you're doing this yourself, I would encourage you to think through that. Walk yourself through this space. Where am I going to put my bag? Do I need a hook for my purse? Do I need an individual locker for each of my children? Do we need charging stations for iPads, for school computers, for your husband's laptop? Do you need cubbies for shoes? Do you need storage for sports equipment? Do you need a sink there to wipe off all the muddy boots and soak things, and throw pool towels in when you walk in the back door? I mean, there's just a lot of different circumstances depending on where you live and what your family situation is, that are just helpful to walk through and make sure there's a home for all of those things. One thing that I have found in designing mudrooms in recent years is that in the past, I think people kind of wanted open cubbies. And as we've done those, I've quickly learned in my process that nobody wants anything open, because you kind of want every space to look neat and tidy. You want to be able to shut doors and not stare at the mess. So we've much more moved to closed locker storages in mudrooms than open, I would say. So that's one note that I've seen kind of trend wise and what people are enjoying. So it's pretty typical mudroom for us is a big locker on the top with a drawer below, shelves inside. I always put an outlet inside of each of them. and multiple hooks and big hooks on either side. And we kind of get as much depth as we can so we can store as much as possible. And I always try to get at least to store it if it's a young family with children, each kid hopefully can have their own locker, and then one that either mom and dad shares, or, if you can, one for each of them. And then kind of any sort of secondary storage. Sometimes mudrooms are roped in with laundry rooms, sometimes they're totally separate. So it just depends on the layout of the house.
We mentioned laundry, so let's go there next, because laundry is one of those spaces that I think when I share laundry rooms, they are the most popular. I think because so many of us dream about having a beautiful space to do our least favorite activity,
Right.
to make it
Spend
a
a lot of
little
time
bit
there.
better.
Yes, they're a hard-wearing space, and you do spend a lot of time in there. And if you're not spending a lot of time in there, a housekeeper is, somebody is. There's a lot, to do. Again, it kind of depends on the size of the space and the requirements of the family, but I have found double sets are great if you can have two washers and two dryers, especially if you have a big family. Recently, everything's bigger in Texas. So we have big houses down here. And what I've seen more often lately is a secondary set of washer and dryer somewhere else, as opposed to two sets in the main laundry room. I'm doing one now where we've got a stacking washer and dryer in the primary closet, and then there's a bigger laundry room downstairs. And sometimes if there are more bedrooms upstairs than down, we'll try to put the big laundry room upstairs, but then maybe you have a stacking one in the mudroom for pool towels and kitchen things. And if the primary is downstairs, that kind of handles that. So sometimes we'll separate them depending on how big the family is and the house. A lot of people like stacking front loaders. I still personally hate a front loader, so I like top loaders. I like very old school washer and dryers that are like workhorses. So that's just a personal preference. It just kind of depends on the client.
I have
Um,
minor top loaders. I have
yeah,
old laundry, but I would prefer to keep, if I could keep my existing terrible old laundry washer and dryer forever, I would, because they are
they
much,
made them better.
they're so much, but they don't even make we won't even go
No,
into that. They don't even make the one that I have anymore. So when it goes, that will be a very sad day. But
I
yeah.
bought what's called a Speed Queen, which is a commercial washer and dryer, and they're very old school. It just has a turn dial. There's no electronics on it. It has a full agitator that goes up to the top. The capacity isn't as big as some of the big monster front loaders, but I've loved it. So that's just kind of a personal preference thing. But I always try to have a place to fold laundry and sort things. I always like a sink in a laundry because I like to soak things, clean shoes. There's so much that, you may want a sink for. A drip dry area for people that like to hang. And that's also a little bit more personal. Some people like to hang a lot more than other people. So I always ask that. And what sort of things are you hanging? Are you hanging small, delicate items, or do you hang all of your dress shirts or whatever it might be? So we make sure there's enough space and there's enough clearance for those pieces of clothing. Sometimes the rod is way too low and it just drags, and then that's not a great way to get something to dry quickly. So we always ask about that. And then really with cabinetry, I'm always trying to kind of make a list of what all you're going to store in the laundry room versus other places in the house. Is this where you keep all your cleaning supplies? Is this where you keep your extra toilet paper and batteries and backup things? Some people, the laundry room are more multi-purpose and they have their gift wrap supplies in there and all their back stock of all of their toiletries. So I try to make a list so that I make sure there's a home for everything. And when I'm designing cabinetry, I will write over each drawer and cabinet what I expect to go in there so that I make sure that it's at a good level, it's at a good size, and it works for what they need it to. I also think a lot about laundry baskets, because once you bring the laundry in, where does it go? Once it's clean and folded, where does that go before it goes to where it belongs? So we've done custom cubbies where each kid has its own laundry basket and it sticks in there. I've done the rolling kind and created a cubby for a rolling laundry basket to tuck away, where you're going to hide the iron. Sometimes people forget about that, and the ironing board. Those are tall and skinny. They need a place to slide into, and broom closets. I think so many times I've looked at a set of new construction plans and there is not a broom closet anywhere. Where are you going to put your mop and your broom and your vacuum and plug in your Dyson and your handhelds and keep all that stuff? So I just really try to walk through my clients' everyday lives and figure out where are all these things and all these functions going to go in your new house or in your renovation and make sure everything has a home.
Now, being a mom now, like how did that inform or change your approach to design? Because you were designing pre-children. So how did that shift for you, or did it change the way you were looking at your spaces?
I've always designed for young families and different, stages of life. So I've learned a little bit from my clients along the way too. Even before I had kids, I learned things watching other families and how they use their home. So that helped me a bit when I had kids. And then obviously living through a lot of that was incredibly helpful. And my kids are now, I have a 10-year-old daughter and boy-girl twins that are 7. So they're still pretty young. And one thing that I've noticed that new parents do, and then I try to help them look ahead, is they're kind of so thick in the here and now if they're in the baby toddler phase, and they kind of lose sight of the future because they're just so deep in the weeds. So needs change as kids grow. And I'm not in the high school, junior high age yet quite, but I'm looking ahead and thinking about those needs. So when I'm working with a space and with clients, the needs of a baby are a lot different than a high schooler. So I try to help them with their spaces. If they're really designing a long-term home, it needs to work now and in the future. So even if they don't have a ton of backpacks and sporting equipment right now, they probably will down the road. And they're going to have a lot of stinky boy sport laundry, when they get in that phase. So I just try to help them look ahead and make sure that we're designing spaces that will work long term.
How was it designing for twins?
Oh man.
Was that new?
Finding or parenting for twins, because that's both really tricky. That was tough. I mean, that was a phase that I almost don't even remember. My husband and I joke that we just like lost a year of our lives and don't remember anything that happened. But it taught me a lot and they're wonderful. It's just really hard when they're little.
Oh
It's
my
fun now,
gosh.
but it was really hard. But it did teach me a lot about that phase and how we use our home. I also had a smaller home then, and I'm very grateful for that because it was a lot easier to manage. So yeah, it did teach me a lot. And I can relate to a lot of the big families that we work with now too. And I have quite a few clients with twins. I have some with multiple
Oh,
sets.
really?
So,
Multiple sets of twins?
yeah, got
Holy
it.
smokes.
So yeah, just kind of makes it a little more relatable. They're like, oh, you get it. Yes, I do. Yes, I've been there, done that. I'm here with you in the thick of the busyness and understanding that things get spilled and that things get messed up, whether you are particular about your kids bringing food into different rooms or not. There's always accidents that happen. So I'm just a little bit more aware and understanding of how people live and how they want their spaces to work and how hard wearing they need to be.
Cars.
And new construction, we got to make sure the garage is big enough. So sometimes that's an issue. And
Oh.
charging port if you've got a hybrid or electric and, some of those things.
And I feel like the garage too is another space where kids just have at it.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
kids, like they'll just go and grab whatever. Do you have to also then look at children's accessibility in certain spaces? I mean, obviously they're
Yeah.
bedrooms, right? But like these family spaces, you're thinking through the lens of how do the kids interact with the space too?
Definitely. And garages, they just tend to be big workhorses too. They're holding a lot of stuff. So that's usually where all the sports equipment goes. And we tend to sort of push that priority off onto organizers. We lean on them a lot for spaces like garages because at the end of the day, most people don't need a garage to be pretty. They just want it to be functional. So instead of form meets function, it's just pure function. So we often pass that responsibility on to organizers to handle that piece of the puzzle. I do have one client that did some really pretty built-ins in her garage and painted them lavender because why not?
Ooh,
But typically it is purely utilitarian.
durability. Are there certain fabrics that you turn to in some of these spaces?
Absolutely. We're very lucky in this day and age that there is a ton of technology that has been put into fibers, fabrics, rugs that really increase the durability factor, which has been really helpful for our business. So yes, when we're looking at a fabric, we not only care about its aesthetics, we are looking at its content, its durability. There are ratings on durability for different textiles. So we pay a lot of attention to that. And then if it's on like a mudroom bench, for instance, we're going to make sure that it's an indoor-outdoor fabric, typically. If it's a window covering, then it doesn't necessarily have to have the same amount of durability. If it's a rug in a space, it either needs to hide dirt in its pattern and the way that it's woven, or it needs to be indoor-outdoor too. So it can be taken outside, hosed down, power washed, etc. I had a girlfriend text me this morning and said, I think it's time to power wash some of my rugs. What do I need to do? I said, take them outside, hose them down, squirt them with a little bit of dish soap, scrub them, and power wash them. And most rugs can come completely clean doing that. So if they're smaller and they're easy to manage, they can be cleaned pretty quickly. But yes, we definitely look at fiber content. Just depends on where it is and where it's going. Things like kitchen banquettes and bar stools, we'll either do a faux leather that's very wipeable and cleanable, or we will do a laminated fabric, which is where we take any textile and we send it off to a company that applies a vinyl laminate on top of it. It becomes kind of slick and diner-like, but it's wipeable and cleanable so that it can kind of handle all the food stains and mess that happens in kitchen and dining spaces. So yeah, we kind of lean on technology, and rugs have come a long way. There's new ones all the time. My favorite rug vendor, every time he comes back from their big show in Las Vegas, is like, there's tons of new polypropylene products out there. That's the indoor outdoor fibers, and they're just constantly coming out with new good looking stuff. And the great thing is now they don't really look like outdoor rugs. They look like wool or sisal, and they're incredibly hard wearing. So
That's
it's an
awesome.
easy time to work in this realm because there's just so many good products out there that are available.
Now, you mentioned the kitchen, and I completely forgot. When you have a family, I mean, you have like certain priorities. It's a gathering space. I think the kitchen, they always say the kitchen is the heart of the home, and that's because it is truly a gathering space. It can be where you're doing homework. It could be where you're trying to like whip dinner together after games. I mean, there's so much that goes on in the kitchen. So, what are your like top things that you like to, if people don't name them, that you maybe even encourage people think about including based on their routines?
Right. Storage and making sure that things are where you need them to be is incredibly important. So again, I talk through routines. How do you like to cook? How do you like to prepare things? What do you do in your kitchen? So I make sure there's a home for everything. Some of the things that we've been doing lately that I've found really helpful and successful for clients is the way that we design cabinetry. We're seeing a little bit of a shift away from just strictly upper cabinets. And we're doing a lot more towers that come down to the countertop, and we can make them deeper because of that. And while I also like the look, found them incredibly useful with my own kids. It puts all of the dishware and glasses more at their eye level. And so it just makes it so much more accessible. I even have one client who is vertically challenged. She's a little bit on the shorter side. And same thing for her. It helped her a ton. She was like, I don't have to stand on my tiptoes and get a step stool out every time I need to reach my plates. And it is very aesthetically pleasing. I think that they're prettier than upper cabinets. And it just has a lot of function. They're deeper too. I can make them 16 or 18 inches deep instead of 12 or 14. And so you get a lot more out of them. So, and I've had clients that say, well, it doesn't look like I have as much storage. And I say, well, actually, you're getting more by doing they call them towers, because you get more depth and you're bringing them all the way down to the surface. And then you're not having to fill this area underneath your upper cabinets with some sort of accessory or doodad or
Yeah,
something to fill
tchotchkes,
the
yeah.
space. Yeah, that just really visually clutters your kitchen. So that has been a trend that's really helpful. Doing more drawers over cabinets. I just think you can better find things inside of a drawer versus a cabinet. One piece that I think a lot of clients miss is vertical slotted storage for cookie sheets and cutting boards, a lot of people just completely forget about them completely and don't have a cabinet that's accessible and that's not too high. Sometimes people will put them over fridges, and fridges these days are quite tall and you can't really get to them. So having a space for those, and a lot of our cabinetry companies will custom build those for us so that we can easily slide pans in and out. And kind of going back to the labeling of cabinetry, I do that in a kitchen. So every single drawer and every single door, I write what I think is going to go in there. So I make sure there's a space for everything. And if you have young children, that might mean making a sippy cup drawer or making a, plates and utensils that allows them to get things for themselves and be more independent. Also to put things away. My kids' responsibility when they get up in the morning is to unload the dishwasher. So they're really good at it now and they can access everything. They don't have to climb up on the cabinets to put things away. So it makes them more self-sufficient and helpful and is a lot easier on us. And then another thing that I consider a lot is plugs. When you're doing your electrical plans, I like to, if you do have an island or you do have bar seating somewhere, I like to put what's called plug mold up underneath the overhang. And that's just a strip of outlets underneath, because I find a lot of times it is a homework zone, or they're trying to help with a project and I need to plug in a laminator. I need to plug in a laptop. They're charging an iPad, so they're doodling around on their iPad while I'm cooking dinner. And then other places where I need appliances plugged in, or a crock pot or a air fryer or some of those appliances. So I always think through where those are all going to sit, because there's a lot of small appliances these days too that everyone has,
I was just about to say, like, the amount of appliances now, and that's a whole separate storage conversation. That's
Yes.
huge, right? Like, I'm not someone who wants them to sit out. So that's been like, we have an old house and that's always a challenge. I mean, I keep so much in my basement because there's just nowhere for these giant. The 1940s Colonial was not made for like the air fryer, the Instant Pot, it's a whole separate, they're
No, and
not
they're
made for these things.
huge.
No.
No, and they're either have a place to tuck them away, or a lot of times we'll do kind of working pantries and we'll let those sit out a little bit more in those spaces. So having outlets in the right locations for all of those pieces so they can kind of be tucked away is handy.
Well, one of the last things that I wanted to ask you is, because we are getting into like a really fun, exciting season, and you are in Texas, you have a family. I have to imagine you have some tradition-based things that you're gearing up for this time of the year. So is there anything that, for folks who are either around your area or possibly visiting your area, that you would recommend they check out, particularly in the autumn season?
Ooh. One of my favorite things to do is go to what's called Worst Fest in New Braunfels, Texas. If anybody is coming down to Texas in the fall, it is a really fun, it's called the Salute to Sausage. New Braunfels
Oh my
is in
gosh, I love that so
Yeah,
much.
it's like a Worst Fest. It's beer, German culture festival. It's my husband's hometown and it's really fun to go to. Round Top is also coming up really soon for the design enthusiasts. We will go every fall and spring. It's coming up pretty soon. So that is about an hour and a half outside of Houston. So easy to fly into, rent a car and go. It's used to be a small little antique fair on the side of a country road, and it's now blossomed into a huge several week long antique and different home goods, fashion, jewelry, art festival. There's all sorts of tents along the side of the road, and it's kind of turned into a country fashion show of sorts, and lots of parties and events and fun things to go to. So I definitely recommend people checking that out. If you've never been, ask a friend who has and let them take you along, because it's a little bit of an adventure and most people don't know what they're getting into when they go, but it's very fun. It's also football season down in Texas, so we're all very obsessed with tailgating and all that fun that's happening, and just kind of all the busy, fun things that happen in the fall. There's so many things coming up. It's a busy time.
It is, I know. Well, on that note, thank you, because I think this is the time where there's a lot of excitement, but there can also be a lot of overwhelm. So being able to chat with you a little bit about how to make the home work for you, not against you, has
Yes.
been very helpful. I know I've certainly gotten some ideas. I'm sure our listeners will too. Well, I will make sure to share links to your website, your social media, so people can follow you. I highly recommend. You have beautiful, beautiful pictures of your work, of course, but they can learn more about what you do and follow along. And I just thank you for taking the time to be here because this was so much fun and very insightful. So thank you.
Good. Thank you so much for having me. It was fun chatting, and I hope everyone gets a little bit out of it.